Right.
Thank you so much, Mary, for joining us. It's really a special privilege to have you on, because you are really the reason we have NY Book Editors. You and authors like you. I mean, your journey has been so inspiring for me. It's just really,
Hey.
yeah, it means a great deal, to see your career progress. And thank you so much for coming on to teach authors about everything you've learned along the way.
Pleasure. So glad to be here.
So let's start at maybe what's the very beginning. You shared a quote that meant a lot to you from the Gospel of Thomas. And it's, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. Could you talk a little bit about what that meant to you when you read it?
Yeah, a very good friend of mine told me that. I heard that quote from a friend. I think it was like 2012 or 2013. And I started thinking about it all the time after that. And I still do. And it did really seem to capture what I had experienced. So I went to law school. I started law school in 2007. I finished in 2010, and I immediately became a lawyer, even though I wanted to be a writer, but I had like huge student loans. I took out student loans to go to law school. So, 6 figures of student loan debt, and everyone I knew was becoming a lawyer. I mean, it made sense. It was like, why else did I go to law school? So I thought, well, I'll write at night, which in retrospect is very cute to think I would have time to do that. And as soon as on my second day, I knew I was not meant to be a lawyer. It was very obvious to me immediately. At least not that kind of lawyer. I was practicing corporate litigation. And also clear to me was that I needed to be writing. I did the artist's way. My office was only a couple blocks away in Manhattan from a Barnes and Noble. And so I went to Barnes and Noble on my lunch break to the self-help section and saw The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron and got a copy and started doing it. And it was like, oh, I need to be right. That really woke me up to this idea that I definitely just needed to be writing. And as a lawyer, so to get back to the quote, as a lawyer, I was having all of these new symptoms, like I was breaking out in hives, and I thought I had a stomach ulcer. I was convinced I had ADHD. I told a doctor, like, I'm sure I have ADHD, and I've just been compensating my whole life, which is why I've been successful. And he asked me if I went to therapy, was his response. But as soon as I quit my job as a lawyer, which I did after just 7 months, all of my symptoms went away. So pretty clear that those were psychosomatic. But I did, as soon as I was able to find work that could support me financially, I had to move to a cheaper apartment and, change my lifestyle a bit. But as soon as I was able to find work that could both support work by which I could support myself and have time to write, I did. So, and I've been writing since.
It's amazing how essential writing is for some people, how restorative it is.
Yeah.
And that's why that story really touched me, because I just feel like, for some people, it's something that they need to do every so often.
Yeah. And, I teach writers now. And so I work with so many writers, and that really does seem to be universal among at least the writers that I work with. Like, we all just have to do it. And I'll still forget it sometimes. I'll be kind of cranky or just feel unsettled in my life, and I'll start to try to figure out what's wrong. And then it'll just occur to me that I haven't written in a while. And it's like, oh,
yes,
it's that.
That's exactly right. I can relate to that exactly. So then you left your job. You had a job that allowed you to write occasionally, or that gave you some time to write at least. So walk us through the process of, dealing with that first draft. How did you put it together?
Okay, so the first thing I tried to write was a memoir because I had been in an essay class and gotten really positive feedback from my peers who were like, "You should write a book." And I knew I wanted to write something, you know, a bigger scale project than just essay. So I knew I wanted to write a book. So I put together a memoir proposal right after I quit my job, and that took a little while. And I you know, I worked with some people, and I took classes, you know, paid someone to edit it, and started querying agents, literary agents, and no one wanted it. I got some positive feedback about it. People seemed to like it, but no one wanted it. And one agent in particular, who I will always be grateful to, Christopher Schelling, who's lovely, said, like, I can't sell this, you know, maybe I could have sold this in the 90s. What else do you have? Which, you know, is both an exciting and also terrible question to get as a writer when you've just poured months and months into one project, you know. I
Yeah.
thought, like, I don't have anything else. Like, this is all I've been writing. And I wrote something back, like, it was funny because he said, I could have sold the hell out of this in the 90s. What else do you have? And I wrote back and said, what could you sell the hell out of now?
That's a great question.
and he said, well, do you have a novel, or would you be interested in writing a novel? And I had been starting to think of the novel idea that would become When You Read This, but at the time it was called My Life's First Draft. And I pitched it to him as My Life's First Draft, and he said, oh, I love this concept, write that and then send that to me. And so the reason I started writing a novel is just because Christopher Schelling told me to write a novel.
Did he become your agent?
No,
Oh,
he
okay.
didn't.
Okay.
So it's funny now
Yeah.
because you know, he didn't become my agent, but once I had the novel, but I still am so grateful to him
Yeah.
for inspiring me to write it, motivating me to write it. So I started writing a draft. I had no idea how to write a novel, so I just Googled how long is a novel, and I think it said something like 70,000 words, and so I just wrote until I hit 70,000 words, and then bought myself a pair of Fry boots as a reward. And so it was, you know, it was meandering, it was stream of consciousness. There was very little structure to it. I knew that. I wasn't under the impression that it was ready to go. I knew it was a very rough first draft. And this was in 2012. So in 2012, I immediately started taking classes, like giving it to friends, getting feedback, taking classes, trying to figure out how to make it better. And this is the beginning of like my sad Picasso's blue period because everyone had ideas for it. I listened to everyone, and it just became this like unwieldy thing that had, I mean, if it didn't have structure before, it really didn't have structure now. It was just like, you know, one friend would say, I like this character, and be like, okay, I'll write a lot more of that character. And then yeah, I would just, had started to pitch agents. I sent it back to Christopher and didn't hear back from him, I think, for a while or something, or he just said no, I don't remember, but started pitching agents and either wasn't hearing or was getting no's, and assumed it had something to do with my writing, with the quality of my like the prose itself. So I started taking classes on, like, you know, like maybe my grammar isn't good enough, or like I took a class on beautiful sentences, which was an amazing class. But that wasn't what my book needed. I mean, the sentences were not the problem at that point. I just didn't realize it.
Right.
Yeah, so I went on like that for a few years, and then I found you. I found you, and I was so happy. Should I get into that part now?
Yeah, and this was only, you know, you were one of our earliest authors. This was a year after we opened.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I had no idea. I mean, I think I just found you through Googling. And yeah, and didn't know what to expect. But I so that was 2014, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so in 2014, I submitted my manuscript to you, and I was looking at my emails this morning and seeing that I said, like, I've been working with, I was working with the agent who became my agent. She was lovely and like very generous in giving me feedback before she was willing to sign me. So she wasn't ready to represent the project, but she thought that it had potential, and I felt I was at this impasse, and that was my communication with you guys. It was like, I'm getting, and she wasn't the only one. It was like, agents are kind of interested in this, but when they read the whole thing, they decline, and I can't figure out what this needs, and I need help.
Yeah.
And so my editor was Victory Matsui, who gave me a developmental edit and wrote, I honestly don't even think I opened the manuscript to see the notes within the manuscript, because the editorial letter was like the most beautiful thing I had ever read. Oh. And not in a way that was just because it reassured me. I mean, it really challenged me. I mean, I opened it, I found it this morning. It's so beautiful. I want to read the entire thing aloud. But I'll just read, well, here are a couple parts.
Yeah.
The prose was nearly flawless. On a sentence to sentence level, your writing is remarkable. I really needed to hear that, because that's where I had been focusing, and I thought that was the problem. And here, suddenly I'm hearing like that's not the problem. But
and
then
that's very high praise.
Oh,
yeah.
So, but the letter starts out, let me warn you up front, I'm going to give you some tough love. I want you to look at this edit not only about this novel, but about your growth as a writer. And it proceeded from there to really give me some tough love as a writer. Basically, the gist of this letter is summed up in a couple of sentences here. You have the humor in spades. It's the heart you need more of. A heart demands deep work. Oh. And so basically, Victory told me that the novel needed heart. And as soon as I read that, I rereading this morning, I almost teared up remembering it, because as soon as I read that, it's like when someone points out to you the thing that you knew deep down, but just weren't seeing for whatever reason, and then gives you permission to see it and affirms that your gut is right. I mean, I basically took this letter as saying, you don't need more writing classes. That's not what this needs. You need to put your heart into this story. It's funny. Good. You're funny. Haha. Congratulations. And you got your sentences down, but you need to feel something and, and get that on the page. And it was so right. And immediately that was permission to do that. And so I set out to do that. And I did that within 6 weeks and had an agent within 6 weeks. And that was the draft of the manuscript that sold.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It was the big turning point, was that letter.
Wow. She's going to be so happy to hear this interview when I send it to her.
Oh, good.
Yeah. It's great how these things can just open up, the doors, the floodgates on a revision. And you said that you learned the difference between revising and editing. When did that come into play? Was that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm talking about, because I didn't know that. So, okay, I wrote the first draft, stream of consciousness, just trying to hit 70,000 words. And then when I went back to read it and to start revising, I immediately started editing at the level of the sentence. Okay, this doesn't flow. This paragraph doesn't belong here. And I had no idea that I was 10 steps ahead of where I needed to be. There's no reason to do that. And the reason, if you're watching this and you are wondering what we're talking about, is because if you could spend hours and hours making a scene perfect at the level of the sentence, and then that scene goes because what you haven't done yet is figured out whether it fits into the overall structure of the story. So that structural level, the macro level, is really important to figure out before you go in and start fine tuning.
Right.
And I didn't know that yet.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And when it came to your writing schedule, how did you, I know you had a young son at the time. I mean, he was a year old probably then, or younger.
I didn't have it.
No.
I didn't have my son yet then.
Okay.
Yeah, that for this I was just childless.
So that was okay. So that was after. So once when You Read This was published, you then published another book, Privilege, a year later. So
right.
that took hardly any time by comparison. And now you have a new book coming out in the spring, right? Is it this?
Yeah, spring? And my novel Palm Beach is coming out in August.
Palm Beach.
Exactly. So Privilege actually sold in the US the night that I had my son. Like I got the email that it had sold while I was in the hospital bed.
Wow.
So it was a pretty exciting 24 hours. Yeah. Yeah, it was a very exciting 24 hours. And so that was a really interesting experience because it sold on a proposal. So I mean, I had written the first couple of chapters only, and then and the proposal, so the kind of overview. But then I had to write like a novel with a newborn, which I had never done before, and that was really an experience of. I mean, I had always worked. I had to work while I was writing When You Read This, so I was still juggling work and writing. It wasn't like I could just write all day. But now I was juggling work with being a parent, with writing, and it was really daunting. I mean, I really wasn't sure like how that was going to get done. And so what I ended up doing was, you had already sold
it. So you had committed.
It was sold, so it had to be exactly, which is why it got done. I mean, in retrospect, like I wouldn't have. I mean, I would have written again, but I wouldn't have written a novel draft with like a 4-week-old baby. I mean, that would not have happened if I didn't have a contract. But what I ended up doing was literally kind of just doing math to figure out, okay, how, if I want to get this done in 6 months, which is what we had agreed to, a first draft, how many pages do I need to write a day? And I came up with 10 handwritten pages, because also during this time, suddenly I had trouble writing a first draft on the computer. It just felt like too much pressure. And so I started writing by hand. So I realized if I could just write 10 pages by hand per day with, some days off, but on average, I could do it. I could get there.
I actually love your thoughts on writing by hand. It's also in your course.
Yeah.
And I first heard this from Neil Gaiman. He writes by hand.
I read that.
Yeah. If you could talk a little bit about the advantages of doing that, because it probably sounds insane to most people.
Yeah, because when I started doing it, it felt a little crazy, but it was it just was the way I was able to do it during this time when I was, trying to nurse and underslept and trying to write a book. I have since learned that there's a lot of science behind it. Like the obvious things people can probably think of, like you don't have distractions, you don't have text alerts and Facebook alerts popping up, right? When you're doing it, you don't have the internet that's just right there waiting for you to go look at purses or something. But more specifically, I was so fascinated by this. There's research showing that when you handwrite, not when you type, but only when you handwrite, like the parts of your brain that are engaged when you're reading are activated. So you're like having more, here's how I interpret that as a non-scientist. My interpretation is you're having an experience that's closer to reading, that's more similar to that of a reader when you're writing by hand than when you're just like, typing on a computer. And that feels true to me. That rings true to me. It feels like that. So I've kept that up. I mean, my novel that's coming out in August, Palm Beach, I wrote the first draft of that by hand too. And I teach in my course. I mean, some people choose not to, and that's an option. And some people can't, just physically. A lot of people have, limitations preventing them from being able to handwrite. But if possible, I think it's an option that I think when people try it, they tend to be like, oh, this is good.
Yeah. I think another point you made, which I really liked, is that there's also less pressure, because visually you just see your messy handwriting and it doesn't look like a book the way it does when you're typing it out. And so you're in that mode where it's a draft. I mean, visually it looks like a draft.
Yeah, it looks like a draft, and it kind of feels like a diary entry or something. I mean, you have that kind of, I think, subconscious sense of, this is private. No one has to see this if I don't want them to. If it's terrible, I can throw it away. All those thoughts.
Yeah. Love that advice. So there you are with your newborn, writing in a notebook. And and you managed to, so I thought this was important too. You said you calculated that it would take 6 months. Did you put in time for when you would complete the first draft?
Yeah, the 6 months was the first draft. So
Okay.
so that was good. So I owed a draft of the manuscript to my editor in October, and this was April, May, June, July, August, September, October. Yeah, this was in early May. So I had 6 months. And so I included time to transcribe it, to go through and do like a first pass revision. But that's it. And it's interesting too, you and I were talking a little bit about outlining before.
Yeah.
So I don't outline, and I don't teach outlining.
And I love that, because no authors will talk about not outlining. So I really wanted you to bring that up.
Yeah, I find it too restrictive, and if it's not fun, then if it's not fun, I don't want to do it. So, writing should be fun, I think. But also I think it helps prevent the book from becoming too prescribed. It feels really prescriptive to me to outline, but I also don't, I neither do nor teach that like you should just like see whatever happens and have no destination in mind. So I guess I do a rough form of kind of outlining, in that I know what the big question is at the heart of the book. I know what the characters want to happen and what their fears are. I know what the kind of big destination is we're going toward. Not necessarily what happens, but like during that moment, but like what's gonna be some event that challenges them or that brings them together. And then I'll do what I think of as headlight outlining, which is kind of planning the next few scenes. And then I also teach a kind of writing plan that follows the 3-act structure of storytelling across 4 notebooks. So writing by hand in 4 notebooks, so that, and it'll be like, by the end of the first notebook, like this should be happening to your protagonist. By the end of the second notebook, this should be happening to your protagonist, so that there is a kind of built-in story arc. And I think with all of these pieces, outlining, I think, is less necessary.
Yeah, it provides some structure, but there's just so much in between that you have no idea about.
Yeah.
Has your central question ever changed?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yes, but only a little bit. So for Palm Beach is a novel that's coming out in August, and it's the story of a caterer who works for a billionaire in Palm Beach and his wife, and 6 months of their lives, living in Palm Beach, and what happens when they have a family crisis and have to rely on this billionaire as their benefactor. And originally the kind of big question at the heart of that was, for me, do we ever really know who we marry?
Ooh.
Um, and it shifted a little bit over time. It became a little bit more about what, more like what compromises can we make within a marriage, and when do they become too much? When do they become too challenging?
Mm-hmm.
So the question still had to do with, you tether yourself to someone, you commit to someone, and what does that mean? Like when does that get tested? But the test was different in the two articulations of the question.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But that's interesting to know kind of how that there was a shift, and that was okay. You discovered that. I just think it's so impressive that without outlining, you're now able to just write books. I mean, first draft in 6 months, and that happened twice with Palm Beach as well, right? Or even, was it even faster?
Well, it's funny because privilege, I wrote the first draft in about 6 months, and then I'm blanking on the timeline. And then, yeah, over the next year or so, I think we did a couple more. Yeah, I'm just blanking on the timeline now. But because it came out in March. So it sold and I wrote it in 2018. And then right, exactly. And then it came out in March 2020, the day before COVID shut the United States down. So it was terrible timing for a book to come out.
Yeah.
But and then Palm Beach, I wrote on a similar timeline. So it sold in October of last year, and I turned in the first draft in May of this year. And then the final draft in October of this year. So it was a year for Palm Beach.
And you said you didn't realize how much time and energy and often professional help needs to go into a revision.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that? So after the first draft, we talked about Victory's memo, but since then, with the last 2 books, how has it worked?
So with the Victory's memo was incredible, and then I have since had an editor, and so that that's the relationship there. Like, I'll send it to my editor Emily, and we have the same kind of trajectory, like big to small, like a sideways pyramid. Like we'll usually have a phone call about the first draft, and maybe she'll follow that up with an email with some big notes, but they're always big notes. I mean, for Palm Beach, it was a huge note. Actually, it was like, your protagonist needs to change, which is about as big of a note as you can get. I mean, I sort of had dual protagonists, and the note was, one of them she really wanted it to be more of one, more the story of one of them, and rather than the other. And it was a great note, and just something she had all these reasons for it, reasons I hadn't thought of. And it's like good editing. And so I revised to really change or shift the point of view of the story. And then, at that point, then she was happy with those changes that I made. So then we like move down to the next level, right? So then it's like, okay, here's some, like, this chunk in this chapter maybe doesn't fit or needs to go here. Here's like, now we're working at the level of kind of like the scene. And then once that seems to be in great shape, then it's on to, okay, let's actually get down to nitty gritty and look at word choice and that sort of thing. But yeah, I had no idea that, and sometimes with writers I'm working with, I'll start to tell them how many drafts they can prepare to go through. And they're like, I don't want to know this right now. I can't hear this right now.
Tell us the number. How many?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, so I just named 3 that we do, that we did of Palm Beach, but now it needs to be copy edited, which will be another draft. Then it will need to be proofread, which will be another draft, and then it will be laid out on the pages in the, in the way it's going to appear in the published edition, and that goes through 3 or 4 passes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's, I mean, we're up to 9, and that's after you're working with, your editor and have
Yeah.
at the publishing house. So and typically, of course, people are revising with or without professional help before even like selling the book. So it's like double-digit drafts.
Yeah. And even
And
then,
that's a low number, that's if
yeah. And
if you're
even
really
then,
counting all of them, if you're really counting every single pass, where you're reading through and looking for things that need fixing, I think, yeah. But sorry, you were going to say even then.
yeah, that's absolutely what it takes. And even then, we'll often open published books that have been through so many drafts and notice their title.
Yes.
And that's after so many eyes have
After
looked at
so
it.
many. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was on my When You Read This Book tour. Someone came up after to get her book signed, and she's like, just so you know, I found this typo
Oh.
on this page. And I was like, what did you tell me? No, but thank you
Yeah.
for telling me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same with Privilege. I was it was at the stage where galleys had gone out, so that's pretty far along when you have these advanced reader copies go out.
Yeah.
And I had one sitting downstairs here in my house, and just picked one up one night and started reading it, and I was like, grabbed my pen. I'm like, oh no, this I'm finding all these things, and this is after it has been proofread.
Yeah.
So
it takes so many passes. It really does. Thanks for bringing that up. I mean, I also don't like talking about just how many passes it really takes, because it is discouraging for people.
Yeah.
The good thing is that from copy editing onward, it's relatively easier. I mean,
oh, so much
yeah,
easier. Yeah, that final draft that with your
Yeah.
your main editor,
yeah,
like the one that I just got in a few weeks ago, is like like from here on out, it's just going to be little
objective things. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's just, yeah,
Like
don't
fact-based
exactly,
inquiries. And
exactly.
yeah, and do you like the font of the chapter titles? I mean, some things that are kind of fun to weigh
Yeah,
in on,
yeah.
like cover design and marketing, and just things that are fun that remind you that, oh, there's a book that's going to come into the world soon.
Absolutely. I think one of the last questions I wanted to go over is really, so I'm sure that you encounter it even now, even with 3 books under your belt, it's resistance. So what happens when you're really struggling and you're not feeling it? What do you do? How do you overcome that?
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely still have it. And I think it depends. I usually get around it by writing, which sounds like if I'm blocked, if I'm blocked as a writer, I just write. No, but I usually get around it by writing in a journaling way. I mean, trying to figure out why I'm stuck. Like, and sometimes it's feelings, sometimes it's fears. Like sometimes it's fraud syndrome, and I just need to like journal out the fraud syndrome thoughts so that I can get them out of my body and then get back to the task at hand.
So you're
and
kind
then
of writing to yourself about the resistance.
Exactly. Like
Okay.
giving the resistance a voice. Like, oh, I'm worried no one's going to read it. No one's going to like it. I'm embarrassing myself. Like I'm, not talented. Everyone's just being, my editor's just being nice to me. I mean, like irrational thoughts, but actual thoughts that I have,
Yeah.
because we all do.
Yeah.
So just like getting them out will sometimes just free me up to go back to the project.
I love that. Yeah.
And then other times,
because when you see it in front of you written down, you realize that it's not, you realize it's irrational. When it's in your head and you're not facing it, it's menacing.
Totally.
But getting it out and actually verbalizing it or writing it down takes away its power. Yeah, you said
yeah, exactly. And another thing I find this comes up a lot with writers I work with, and I've experienced it too. Like they'll get to like was working with this writer a few months ago who said he just always stops at 50,000 words. Like he'll start a draft and get to 50,000 words and then just feels stuck and has all these like, 2/3 written novel drafts in his desk. And I think I've related to that feeling of like, I'm 2/3 of the way through and I have no idea what to do next. And my sense of a lot of times what's going on there is that it's something needs to happen. Something new needs to happen in your story that you didn't plan. So that's why you're stuck, because you didn't see this coming, and it's a surprise even to you. And so it's going to be a surprise to the reader too, which is a good thing. But like, it's just time for things to take a turn in the story. And so that can jostle, I think, people out of that stuck place to think like, just a brainstorm, like what could happen here? Just make a list of, write the craziest possible things down that could happen. Like someone died. I know I'm not going to kill off this person, but okay, I could. Someone dies, blah, blah, like just list them out. And like, I find often they'll get to one thing and it's like, oh, that's crazy, but cool. What if that really happened now? And then when you have that sense that it's kind of exciting and you don't know where it would lead, but there's something about it that feels right and it would be fun to write, then that like unlocks the last third or so of the book. I've absolutely had that sense of like, oh, I've just unlocked the last third of the book by letting myself be open to possible things in the story that I never would have dreamed of, in the last few months or weeks that I've been writing it.
That's great advice. Giving yourself permission to just be crazy with that next idea. Yeah.
And again, I think the notebook's such a great place to do that because you're not married to any of those things, right? You're just writing down ideas by hand. Yeah. No one has to see them. You can cross them out. They can be terrible. But you might come up with something cool that makes you, that makes it fun.
Yeah, definitely.
So sometimes I think that blocked feeling or feeling bored with it can just be a sign of that. Like, okay, it's just time for something to happen. This is a signal that something needs to change in the actual plot of the book.
And it's hard to mentally make that leap to really surprise yourself when you've been living with a certain idea of what should happen. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Because you're like in control and you have this illusion of control and
essentially you're saying you should give that up.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. No, that's really great. That's such a great nugget. So, and you have a course which I've reviewed and I really love it. Could you give us a kind of idea of, which authors it's right for?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So it's called the 12-week book draft, and it's primarily for novelists of all genres, of people in there writing thrillers, romance, literary fiction. No matter what genre you're writing, I think it's a good fit. Ages too. We have middle grade, YA. We even have a couple of memoirists who are finding it valuable. It's not for anyone who's writing a non-narrative book, so it's not going to be useful to you if you're writing how-to or a business book or something like that. But yeah, fiction, any long-form fiction, it's really suited for.
And I love that there's a community aspect to it, right?
Yeah, it's a really, really amazing community. So it's an online self-paced course, so you can enroll at any time, but we have these live weekly meetings as a group, and we just troubleshoot what's going on with people's projects. We also just have like an online forum where people are always chatting and running things by each other. But those live weekly meetings are really where I think like the heart of the course is, really is where the heart of the course is. And I love them. They're my favorite part of the week.
And you're giving NY Book Editors authors
a
discount, right?
Yes, $200 off with a code that I can't remember right now.
I'll put the code underneath in the comments.
Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah. I really enjoyed your course because the way you teach is so concise. You're able to really land on, and I'm sure that people can tell through this interview, on the key details that really help, I think, authors progress without belaboring the point or
Thank you.
we're doing, yeah, it's it's really just a pleasure to go through the modules and the PDFs.
Awesome. Thank you. I actually I worked closely with a producer for this course because I wanted to do it right. And I think, when it comes to being concise, that like he helped a lot with that. There was a lot of, when we were filming, it was a lot of like, can you just say that but in a shorter way?
It
Like
really,
a lot of editing. He was doing a lot of editing. Yeah.
yeah, it must have been a lot of work. I mean, that's what it takes to
Yeah.
produce something like this. But yeah, it really, I think, enhances the experience of going through the course. The way you teach is just I think really phenomenal. And I think the fact that you don't stress outlining is important, because most courses, really spend a lot of time on the outlining component. So if that
Yeah.
doesn't speak to you as an author, if that hasn't worked for you in the past, then
Yeah.
yeah, this might
Yeah,
be.
I only teach what I do. And
Yeah.
so it's not an outlining heavy course. I mean, there are some people in there who, I also teach like to each his own. They're like,
Mhm.
if a rule's not working for you, break the rule,
Yeah.
including, if someone teaches you a tool that's not working for you. I mean, that's what I did for all those years. I was like doing what everybody told me to do and not doing what worked for me. So I definitely don't want to replicate that experience for people. But
Yeah.
I wanted the course to be just to teach what I do and have found successful. And to be the course that I would have found really beneficial, in 2013. Like, let's walk through what to do and how to rewrite this draft so that it's strong.
Yeah.
And also I took a lot of classes that were very craft focused. This is a process focused course. I mean, there are craft components, but it's not, I didn't want it to feel like more work. Like already you're trying to write a novel. Now you have all this course homework and things to think about, and you still need to write your novel. Like, it's not supposed to add to the burden. It's supposed to like take away from the burden. So
Yeah.
there's like whole lessons on things that you don't need to do. Like, you don't need to do this. You don't need to do this. Here's what the homework for the course is writing the book, which is what I would have.
It's
Yeah.
such a relief. Yeah. Not here's this
Yeah.
totally different exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, here's the character
Yeah.
generating exercise for you to
Yeah.
do, and all the extra time you have,
Yeah.
which no one has. Yeah.
And I also love how flexible you are, that and you touched on that you, even when it comes to setting a deadline, it's okay if you don't, meet it.
Yeah.
But just having it makes a
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah. Having some goal, even if it's in a year from now or
Yeah.
9 months from now. Yeah, everybody, when they come and they set a goal date and choose a goal reward, because we have to reward our like inner child who wants a treat at the end,
Yeah.
so that they can be held to it. But everybody's goal date is different. Some people want to write it in 4 weeks. Some people want to write it in there's one student right now who loves to remind everyone that she's not trying to write it quickly because I think because so many people are, that she feels this.
Yeah.
She just wants to remind everyone that she's just taking her time, and that's fine.
Yeah, it feels like you really bring psychology into it, but not overtly. I mean, that it's the reason why you suggest things, but you don't sort of get into the psychology of it, of course. But
Yeah.
there's all this kind of thought and reasoning behind your suggestions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Like, the goal is to get it done and to do it well. Like, those are the two goals.
Yeah.
And it's exciting because it works for a lot of people. So it's really fun to see like people actually finish their drafts, and then I send them a treat. They get their own treat. They're just treats flying everywhere.
That's the hardest part. Oh my gosh. Anyone who finishes a draft, I'm just in awe.
Yeah.
It's a Herculean task. I mean, people, I think people who have never attempted one can't really understand. It's,
Yeah. It's such a cool moment, and it's just so privately special.
yes.
It's such like a special moment with yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, I joked about like going to buy those Fry boots, but I like they were going to be my reward, and they were. And I just so fondly remember I lived in Brooklyn and like walking down to the shoe store to buy these boots. I think I even told the clerk, like, these are my reward for writing my novel. And she didn't care.
Yeah, when you mentioned that, now Fry boots will always be linked to the book when you read this for me.
Oh, good. I
Yeah.
love being associated with Fry boots.
Well, thank you so much for joining, Mary. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you. This was really fun. And it was so much fun going back and revisiting that letter from Victory. So I'm glad, that alone, I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to do, because it's such a good example of, so something else, I know we're wrapping up, not starting another topic, but something else we talk a lot about in the course is feedback, like how to get good feedback and what to do with it and how to give good feedback. And it's just such a great example of like really wonderful feedback, and like not discouraging, in fact, really uplifting, but like, but like Victory said, tough love.
It means so much that that was an inflection point in your process, really. And I think part of what we experience is it's not always easy. I mean, I think it's great that you read the feedback and you weren't overwhelmed. I think it's not always that easy for authors. Some authors just feel like, it takes them a couple of days. Sometimes we like to call the memo retroactive, and you have to become like acclimated to it.
Yeah.
So it's good to hear that, it just immediately spoke to you, and it didn't feel like it was too much.
Yeah. Of course, I'm sure there was a part of me that like just hoped it would be like, there's nothing to change. All these agents who are turning you down are just wrong.
Yeah.
But in terms of what it could say, and I think like the part about it being important for my career as an author was really true. Like I mean, I think what I learned from that letter I've taken with me in everything I've done since, and still do. Like you have to show up emotionally on the page. Like it doesn't matter how clever you can be or how impressive your vocabulary is if you don't like bring that emotional investment. And I think that it was just really important for me to hear someone say that.
I think we'll end it on that perfect note. Thanks again, Mary, and hopefully a lot of our authors will see you in your course.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. This has been really a joy.